The daguerreotype surfaced during the 2023 estate sale of the Whitfield mansion in rural Massachusetts. Hidden in a false bottom of an antique writing desk, a small, ornate silver case held a remarkably well-preserved portrait dated September 18, 1897. The image showed two young women in Victorian dress, seated together in what looked like a formal parlor. The reverse identified them as the Whitfield sisters, Elizabeth and Catherine, autumn 1897. At first, the picture seemed like a typical family keepsake, historical but not unusual. When historical conservator Dr. Amelia Parker received the photograph for review before it entered the Berkshire Historical Society collection, she treated it with standard preservation steps. The Whitfield family was well known in New England textile manufacturing, with a long paper trail in local archives. This portrait would simply sit alongside other Whitfield images already in the collection. Only during high-resolution digitization did Dr. Parker notice something striking. Elizabeth Whitfield, the older sister on the left, looked straight at the camera with the calm, composed expression common to Victorian portraits. Catherine Whitfield, however, showed something very different. Despite perfect posture and a neutral face, her eyes displayed clearly dilated pupils and a distant, unfocused look that clashed with her otherwise proper appearance. "The physiological anomaly is unmistakable," Dr. Parker wrote in her first notes. "This is not a photographic flaw or damage. Catherine Whitfield's pupils are markedly dilated, and her gaze lacks the focused attention seen in her sister. In modern medical terms, these are consistent with specific conditions or with drug effects." That detail sent Dr. Parker into a full investigation of the Whitfield sisters and the circumstances behind this seemingly ordinary picture. She began with official records from the late 19th century. The 1900 census confirmed that Elizabeth Whitfield, born 1875, and Catherine Whitfield, born 1878, were daughters of industrialist Harold Whitfield and his wife, Margaret. The family lived on their large estate in the Berkshires, where Harold oversaw his textile operations. Parish books from St. Stephen's Episcopal Church recorded Elizabeth's regular attendance through adulthood, while Catherine's attendance became irregular after 1896, the year before the photograph. Medical sources held by the Massachusetts Historical Medical Society showed that Catherine saw several Boston physicians in 1896 and 1897. The files did not specify diagnoses, but the pattern was clear. "The documentary trail is compelling," Dr. Parker told the Historical Society's board. "Catherine's public activities drop sharply right before this photograph, while Elizabeth's social life continued as usual." Vital records gave the hardest context. Catherine Whitfield died on November 2, 1897, about 6 weeks after the sitting. The death certificate, signed by family doctor Dr. Jonathan Harrington, listed nervous exhaustion and cardiac failure, a vague Victorian formula that could cover many actual conditions. Most revealing was a note in the Whitfield family Bible stored in the Society's archives. Beneath Catherine's death date, a different hand had written, and later tried to erase, "May she finally find peace from her affliction." Together, these sources suggested Catherine had been unwell for months before the portrait, and that her eyes might show it. Dr. Parker consulted Dr. Rebecca Thornton, a neurologist and specialist in historical medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital. Using high-resolution scans, Dr. Thornton studied Catherine's eyes, posture, and facial tone. "The dilation is extreme," she reported, "and could not be maintained voluntarily during the long exposures required in 1897. This points to a medical issue or, more likely, to medications commonly given at the time." She noted more subtle signs, too. Catherine's pose, while arranged to look natural, showed unusual stiffness. Her hands in her lap showed a faint tremor, captured as a slight blur in an otherwise sharp image. Her complexion was paler than Elizabeth's, with deeper shadows around the eyes, suggestive of long fatigue or illness. Given the visual evidence and the period, Dr. Thornton wrote, Catherine shows classic signs of treatment with belladonna derivatives or opium-based medicines, both routinely prescribed in the 1890s for epilepsy, female nervous disorders, and pain. Comparing the portrait to an earlier family photograph from 1895, she also saw subtle facial and neck thinning, pointing to a progressive condition rather than a brief illness. Her conclusion: this image unintentionally captures physical effects of either a serious neurological disorder or the side effects of treating it. Practice often relied on strong drugs with visible consequences, especially for poorly understood conditions like epilepsy, neuralgia, or psychiatric illness. The camera had recorded not just a family portrait, but evidence of Catherine's treatment, something the formal pose tried to smooth over. Dr. Parker then reviewed Whitfield family letters preserved at the Massachusetts Historical Society. Correspondence between Elizabeth and relatives from 1895 to 1898 offered an intimate window. In a letter from February 1896 to a maternal aunt, Elizabeth wrote, Catherine's episodes have grown more frequent and severe. Father has consulted Boston specialists, but their judgments differ. Mother sits by her bed every night, afraid of what might happen after dark. We keep up appearances for callers, but at home we are living in a hospital. A letter from July 1897, just 2 months before the photograph, showed growing worry. Dr. Harrington has raised Catherine's dose again. The new formula from Vienna better controls her seizures, but leaves her in a state that frightens Mother. Catherine prefers this fog to the terror of the attacks. We have canceled her coming out season, and society is already whispering. The most candid note came 1 week after the sitting. The photographer was remarkably patient. Catherine took her medicine 2 hours before, which left her docile but visibly affected. He placed her carefully and asked me to keep my hand on her arm to steady her. Father insisted we proceed despite Mother's objections. He will preserve the story that all is well with the Whitfield name. The result is technically excellent, but it shows Catherine in her pharmaceutical mask, not her true spirit. I cannot look without crying. After Catherine's death in November 1897, Elizabeth wrote, The end was quiet, almost a mercy. Father removed every image of Catherine in illness from the albums, keeping only those from childhood. He speaks of her now only for what she was as a girl, as if the young woman she became is a fiction. These private letters confirmed that Catherine was battling a serious neurological illness, likely epilepsy, managed with the limited and problematic methods of the time. A turning point came when Dr. Parker found that Dr. Jonathan Harrington had donated his papers to Harvard Medical School's historical collection. Although patient details were protected in formal records, Harrington kept a private research journal describing unusual cases, naming patients only by initials. Notes for C.W., female, 19, from 1896 to 1897 matched Catherine's age and timeline. He detailed a case of progressive epilepsy resistant to standard care, with careful notes on seizure types and medication trials. In March 1897, he wrote, implemented the bromide belladonna protocol as recommended by Dr. Gowers of London. Patient shows significant reduction in major events, but typical mydriasis, pupil dilation, and confusion. Family reports patient prefers these effects to the alternative. Dose adjusted to maintain function with minimal severe manifestations. By August 1897, 1 month before the photograph, he recorded, CW's condition continues to deteriorate despite aggressive medication. Major seizures controlled, but petty mal daily. Physical weakening apparent. Consulted Massachusetts General, prognosis poor. Family informed, Father resists institutional care. The final entry for C.W., dated October 30th, 1897, days before Catherine died, states, "Cardiac complications emerging. Bromide levels necessarily high to control neurologic symptoms likely contributing to cardiovascular strain. Family advised to prepare for imminent decline." Dr. Benjamin Lewis, a medical historian at Harvard Medical School, put this in context. In the 1890s, epilepsy treatment was mostly palliative and by modern standards dangerous. Potassium bromide was the main anticonvulsant, often paired with belladonna derivatives. Both produced strong side effects, including the distinct pupil dilation seen here. Long-term bromide use often led to bromism, chronic toxicity affecting the heart, cognition, and physical strength. These findings confirmed that Catherine's unusual eyes in the portrait captured the drug effects themselves, an unplanned record of Victorian medicine and its costs. Next, Dr. Parker visited the archives of Harland Photography Studio, the firm that made the sisters' portrait. William Harland was a leading Massachusetts portrait photographer from 1880 to 1915, and his business records, appointments, notes, and technical logs were preserved by the New England Photography Historical Society. The September 1897 book confirmed a Whitfield sitting, marked as a home session rather than studio work, an option reserved for high-status clients or those unable to travel. A margin note read, "Special considerations required. Private arrangement with Mr. Whitfield." Most important were Harland's private session notes with candid remarks never meant for clients. Difficult sitting at Whitfield estate. Elder daughter composed and cooperative. Younger daughter physically present but mentally distant due to medical treatment. Father insistent on presenting normality despite obvious difficulty. Used side lighting to minimize pupillary abnormality. Could not mask fully. Positioned younger so elder could offer subtle support without making condition explicit. A follow-up note added, "Mr. Whitfield chose final print against my advice to use an alternative with less visible abnormality. He insisted on a fully formal presentation. Charged standard rate despite extra time. Maintaining Whitfield Industries' relationship takes priority." Harland's grandson, now in his 80s, added context in an interview. "My grandfather wrote that the Whitfield job troubled him. He felt portraits should tell the truth, but wealthy families wanted images that told their story, not reality. The Whitfield picture shows both. It reveals and conceals, depending on how closely you look." In proceeding with the portrait despite visible drug effects, Harland captured not only the sisters, but a medical reality the family acknowledged in private and hid in public. To understand why a family would both show and hide an illness in a portrait, Dr. Parker consulted Dr. Victoria Hamilton, a Victorian social historian at Smith College. Together, they studied how the image reflected attitudes toward illness in late 19th century New England. The 1890s were a turning point in public understanding of neurological and psychiatric conditions, Dr. Hamilton said. Epilepsy carried heavy stigma, tied in many minds to moral failure or even demonic influence. Wealthy families like the Whitfields often hid such diagnoses while pursuing whatever treatments existed. Photography of the sick was a negotiation between documentation, denial, and social display. Victorian mourning customs made post-mortem photos and images of the terminally ill relatively common, but chronic conditions, especially in young women of marriageable age, were kept out of view. Most families avoided photographing a visibly affected daughter, Dr. Hamilton explained. They either left her out, waited for remission, or staged the scene to conceal symptoms. What's unusual here is that the father insisted on including Catherine even while medicated. His choice asserted normality and unity, while Catherine's eyes inadvertently told the truth. Simultaneous acknowledgement and denial, typical of that era's ambivalence around chronic illness. Dr. Parker's most personal evidence came from the papers of Elizabeth Whitfield, who lived until 1962, never married, and kept the family home. Her journals and letters, donated to the Berkshire Historical Society but never fully catalogued, revealed the day-to-day reality. From September 18, 1897, the day of the portrait, Elizabeth wrote, "The photographer arrived at 10:00. Catherine had several small episodes overnight and was exhausted. Dr. Harrington gave her medicine at 8 and told father she would be calm enough by mid-morning. Mother wept in private while Catherine's hair was arranged. Her beautiful chestnut curls are thin and dull from the bromides." When seated beside me on the settee, Catherine whispered, "Do I look normal, Lizzie?" I told her she looked lovely, though her eyes showed the treatment. Father watched the whole session like a soldier on duty, as if his will could defeat her illness. The photographer worked swiftly and kindly, speaking to Catherine even when her replies were slow. When he suggested another day, Father answered there might not be many better days ahead, the only time I have heard him admit what we all know. An October entry described the delivery of the prince. Mother saw Catherine's eyes, so vacant compared with the bright child she was, and left in distress. Father called it excellent, though his hand shook. Catherine studied the picture longest, touched her face, and said, "So this is how you see me now." I did not say that the image flatters her current state, her decline since the sitting has quickened. After Catherine died, Elizabeth noted, "Father placed the portrait in his study. Visitors ask about Catherine's strange look. He says she was unwell that day, but insisted on sitting with me. The half-truth satisfies society and lets him keep her image near. To me, it is the most honest record of our last months, Catherine present but far away, held to us by our hands and by medicines that both sustained and diminished her." To ground Catherine's treatment in medical history, Dr. Parker worked with Dr. Richard Bennett of Johns Hopkins University. They linked the portrait's visible signs to the changing understanding of epilepsy in the late 19th century. "The 1890s were a crucial period," Dr. Bennett said. "John Hewlings Jackson was reframing epilepsy as a neurological, not moral disorder. But treatments were primitive. Potassium bromide was standard, often with belladonna and in some cases early barbiturates. These drugs reduced seizures by depressing the central nervous system, but at a cost: pupil dilation, cognitive slowing, tremors, skin eruptions, and over time, cardiovascular stress. The photograph shows the paradox," he added. "The very medicines that reduced seizures also impaired daily life. Families and doctors faced hard trade-offs between control and cognition." Records also showed Dr. Harrington had trained briefly with William Gowers in London, a leading epileptologist. That explained his use of advanced methods for the day, even with their risks. Based on notes and family accounts, Dr. Bennett believed Catherine likely had a progressive form of epilepsy, perhaps tied to a structural or autoimmune issue. Without modern imaging, modern anticonvulsants, or surgery, decline was likely, even with careful care. Through work in multiple archives, Dr. Parker assembled the full story of the Whitfield sisters and the portrait that captured both their bond and Catherine's medical reality. The last step was to understand how later generations handled the image. Harold Whitfield kept the portrait in his study until his death in 1915. Elizabeth then kept it in the house. Relatives recalled visitors frequently remarking on Catherine's eyes. Elizabeth usually gave a gentle explanation that her sister had been unwell, without entering specifics. In the 1950s, when Elizabeth donated most family photos to the Historical Society, she deliberately kept this portrait back in her private rooms. Her will ordered that the writing desk with the hidden compartment remain sealed for 20 years after her death. suggesting she wanted the picture preserved but not immediately shared. Her final journal, written in her 80s, offered a closing reflection. In 1960, she wrote, "I have kept Catherine's true story private for decades, honoring Father's wish to shield our name from the stigma of epilepsy. Nearing my end, I regret this partial erasure." The portrait Father demanded, the one that shows her eyes shaped by the very remedies meant to help, has become dear to me because it tells a truth about her struggle, even if it cannot capture her spirit. She continued, "Medical science has changed astonishingly since we lost her. I read that children now live well with what took my sister. I wonder what Catherine might have been had she been born now. I will keep the portrait hidden in my lifetime, but I hope future viewers see in those dilated pupils not shame, but proof of how far treatment has come. How what once required sedation to the point of stupor can now be managed without losing the person to save the patient." When Dr. Parker finished her research, the Berkshire Historical Society presented the portrait in a special exhibition, Hidden in Plain Sight: Medical Realities in Late Victorian Photography. The display placed the image beside a timeline of epilepsy care over the next century, fulfilling Elizabeth's hope that her sister's picture would serve more than family memory, documenting both Victorian medical limits and the people who lived within them.